The stagecoach lurched to a halt in Snake River, Idaho, sending dust spiraling into the hot August air of 1882. And Grace Ellsworth gripped her cane tighter as she heard the driver jump down and approach her door with heavy footsteps that told her nothing about what awaited her in this frontier town she would never see. "Madam, we have arrived," the driver said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Snake River. Your destination." Grace nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man named Samuel Winters, a rancher who had promised in his letters that her blindness would not matter to him, that he needed a wife, and she needed security. It had seemed like a fair arrangement when she had nothing left in Boston, except pity from distant relatives, and the constant reminder that a blind woman of 22 had few prospects in civilized society. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the door frame and feeling her way carefully. The driver took her elbow, guiding her down the steps. Her boots hit solid ground, and she stood there, feeling the heat of the sun on her face and hearing the sounds of a living town around her. Horses whinnying, men calling to each other, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. "Where should I take you?" the driver asked. "I was told Mr. Winters would meet me at the stage station," Grace replied, turning her head slightly, as if that might help her hear better. She had lost her sight to scarlet fever when she was 14, and in the 8 years since, she had learned to navigate her world through sound, touch, and memory. But this was a new world entirely, and she felt more vulnerable than she had in years. "Well, there is no one here claiming you," the driver said, and she heard the discomfort in his voice. "Let me ask around." Grace stood there, her hands clasped around the smooth wood of her cane, feeling exposed. She heard the driver walk away, his boots crunching on what she assumed was dirt or gravel. Voices murmured nearby, but she could not make out the words. She focused on breathing steadily, refusing to let panic take hold. Then she heard different footsteps approaching, lighter than the driver's but still distinctly masculine. They stopped a few feet away. "Miss Ellsworth." The voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that marked him as a Westerner. "Yes," she said, turning toward the sound. "Are you Mr. Winters?" "No, madam. My name is Brennan Boyd. I work at the Winters Ranch." There was a pause, and she sensed hesitation in it. "I have some difficult news." Grace's stomach dropped. "What news?" "Mr. Winters passed away 3 days ago." His heart gave out while he was mending fence. It was quick, if that is any consolation. He did not suffer. The world seemed to tilt beneath Grace's feet. She had not loved Samuel Winters, had never even met him, but he had represented safety, a place in the world. Now that was gone, and she was standing in the middle of a town she could not see, with no money beyond the few coins in her reticule, no family, and no way to get back to Boston even if there had been anything to go back to. "I see," she managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Thank you for telling me." "The thing is," Brennan Boyd continued, and she heard genuine concern in his tone, "Sam was a good man, and he talked about you, about how you were coming all this way to be his wife. He was looking forward to meeting you. I know this is not what you expected, but I cannot just leave you standing here with nowhere to go." "I do not wish to be anyone's burden," Grace said stiffly, lifting her chin. She had heard those words too many times in Boston, had felt the weight of being an obligation. "If you could direct me to a boarding house, I will manage." "There is no boarding house in Snake River," Brennan said gently. "And even if there was, you do not know this town, and I would not feel right abandoning you. Sam would not have wanted that either. Look, the ranch is still there. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, is still there. Come out to the ranch, at least for tonight, and we can figure out what to do in the morning." Grace wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and independence, but the practical part of her brain knew she had no real choice. She was in an unfamiliar place with no resources and no allies. This man was offering help, and she would have to accept it, at least temporarily. "Very well," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Please just call me Brennan," he said. "Let me get your trunk loaded on the wagon." She heard him move away, heard him speaking to the driver, heard the scrape and thud of her trunk being moved. Then he was back, and his hand touched her elbow lightly. "May I help you to the wagon?" he asked. "Yes, please." She had learned long ago that refusing all assistance was foolish pride. She needed help sometimes, and there was no shame in accepting it from someone who offered it kindly. Brennan guided her carefully, describing each step. 3 steps forward, then there is a step up to the wagon. The seat is about waist high. I will help you up. She appreciated that he told her what to expect rather than just pulling her along. When they reached the wagon, he helped her find the step with her foot, then steadied her as she climbed up. The seat was rough wood, but it seemed sturdy. She settled herself and arranged her skirts while Brennan walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. "It is about 5 miles to the ranch," he said as he took up the reins. "The road is pretty rough in places, so hold on to the side if you need to." The wagon lurched into motion and Grace gripped the edge of the seat. She was acutely aware of Brennan beside her, aware of his size and presence. She could smell horse and leather and something clean, like soap. She wondered what he looked like, but that was a useless thought. She had learned to know people by their voices and their actions, not their faces. They rode in silence for a while, and Grace listened to the sounds around her. The creak of the wagon, the clip-clop of the horses' hooves, the jingle of harness, birds singing. A breeze that carried the scent of sage and something else, maybe wildflowers. It was so different from Boston with its cobblestones and sea smell and crowds. "Can I ask you something?" Brennan said finally. "Yes. When did you lose your sight?" Most people were too uncomfortable to ask directly. They would dance around the subject or ignore it entirely. Grace found his straightforwardness refreshing. "When I was 14, scarlet fever. I was very ill, and when I recovered, my sight was gone. That must have been hard." It was. "For a long time, I was angry at the world. But eventually, I learned to live differently. I went to a school for the blind in Boston. They taught me to read using raised letters, to navigate with a cane, to manage daily tasks. I can cook, so even do arithmetic. I am not helpless." "I never thought you were," Brennan said, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. "Sam said in his letters that you were brave for coming all this way." "Brave or desperate," Grace said with a bitter laugh. "My parents died when I was 19. I lived with my aunt and uncle for a while, but they made it clear I was an inconvenience. When I saw Sam's advertisement for a mail-order bride, it seemed like a chance to have my own home, my own life. I suppose that was foolish. It was not foolish to want those things. Everyone wants those things." They rode on, and Grace felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Brennan Boyd seemed like a decent man, at least so far. That was something to be grateful for. After what felt like an eternity of jostling along the rough road, Brennan said, "We are here. The ranch house is just ahead." The wagon slowed, then stopped. Grace heard Brennan set the brake and jump down. A moment later he was beside her, helping her down. Her feet hit the ground and she stood there, trying to orient herself. "The house is about 20 feet straight ahead," Brennan said. "There are 6 steps up to the porch. Mrs. Henderson should be inside." "Thank you." Grace moved forward carefully, sweeping her cane ahead of her. She found the steps, climbed them slowly, and reached the porch. Before she could knock, she heard the door open. "Oh, you poor dear," a woman's voice said, warm and maternal. Come in, I am Edna Henderson. I have been so worried since Samuel passed. Come inside and let me get you settled." Grace felt herself being gently ushered inside into a space that smelled like bread and coffee and wood smoke. Mrs. Henderson kept up a steady stream of chatter describing the layout of the house, guiding Grace to a chair in what she said was the kitchen. "Sit down, dear. You must be exhausted from your journey. I will make you some tea, or would you prefer coffee? We drink a lot of coffee out here." "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Grace said. She sank into the chair, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. "Brennan told you about Samuel?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. "Yes. It was such a shock. He seemed healthy as a horse, but these things happen. The Lord works in mysterious ways." There was a pause, the sound of a kettle being filled, the clank of a stove. "The question is, what will you do now, dear?" "I do not know," Grace admitted. "I used most of my money for the journey here. I cannot afford passage back to Boston, and even if I could, I have nothing to return to." "Well, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "This ranch needs a woman's touch. Samuel never married, you see, and it has been just him and the ranch hands for years. I come in to cook and clean, but I have my own place in town. With Samuel gone, I suppose the ranch will go to his brother in California, but that will take time to sort out. Until then, you stay right here and rest." Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you. You are very generous." "Nonsense. It is just common decency." The door opened and Grace heard boots on the floor. Brennan's footsteps, she thought. She was already learning to recognize them. "I brought Miss Ellsworth's trunk inside," he said. "I put it in the spare room." "Thank you, Brennan," Mrs. Henderson said. "Now sit down and have some coffee. You have been working all day." Grace heard him pull out a chair and sit. The kitchen filled with the comfortable sounds of domestic life. The kettle beginning to whistle, the clink of cups, the scrape of spoons. Mrs. Henderson hummed tunelessly as she worked. "Miss Ellsworth was just saying she does not know what she will do," Mrs. Henderson said to Brennan. "I told her she can stay here as long as she needs." "That seems right," Brennan agreed. "Sam would have wanted her taken care of." "I cannot impose indefinitely," Grace said. "I need to find some way to support myself. Is there work in town? I can sew, and I can do other tasks if someone is patient enough to teach me where things are." "Snake River is not a big town," Brennan said thoughtfully. "Maybe 100 people. There is a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith, and not much else. I do not know if anyone is hiring." "What about the ranch?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Could Miss Ellsworth help out here? The Lord knows I could use an extra pair of hands with the cooking and cleaning." "The hands are always hungry and there is always mending to be done." "That is an idea," Brennan said slowly, "but I do not know who would pay her. With Sam gone, there is no one to authorize wages." "I would be happy to work just for room and board," Grace said quickly. "I do not need much. Just a place to stay and food to eat." "That does not seem right," Brennan said. "You should be paid for your work." "Right now, I am just grateful not to be turned out on the street," Grace said. "If I can help Mrs. Henderson and earn my keep, that is more than I expected this morning." They talked for a while longer, working out the details. Grace would stay at the ranch and help with the household tasks. Mrs. Henderson would teach her the layout of the house and the routines. It was not the life Grace had imagined when she had left Boston, but it was something, and she was in no position to be choosy. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the spare room, Grace stared into the darkness that was the only thing she ever saw and tried not to cry. She had been so hopeful when she had boarded the train in Boston. She had imagined a new life, a husband who did not pity her, a home of her own. Instead, she was a charity case once again, dependent on the kindness of strangers. But at least these strangers seemed genuinely kind. That was more than she'd had in Boston. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices outside. She dressed carefully, running her hands over her clothes to make sure everything was properly fastened, then made her way cautiously out of her room. She trailed her hand along the wall, counting her steps, building a mental map of the house. "Good morning," Mrs. Henderson's cheerful voice called. "You are just in time for breakfast. Come sit down and I will get you a plate." Grace found her way to the kitchen table and sat. The smells of bacon and eggs and fresh bread made her stomach growl. She had barely eaten the day before, too upset and exhausted to have much appetite. Mrs. Henderson set a plate in front of her and guided her hand to the utensils. "There is bacon on the left, eggs in the middle, and a biscuit on the right. Coffee cup is just above the plate." "Thank you." Grace ate slowly, carefully, aware that eating neatly required concentration when you could not see your food. She had learned techniques at the school in Boston, but she was always self-conscious about it around strangers. "The hands will be coming in for their midday meal around noon," Mrs. Henderson said. "There are 6 of them, plus Brennan. They work hard, so they eat a lot. I usually make something simple but filling. Stew or beans or roast with potatoes. You cook." "I can cook simple things," Grace said. "At the school, they taught us how to use the stove safely and how to measure ingredients by feel and sound. I am not a fancy cook, but I can manage basic meals." "That is all we need out here. Fancy cooking is for city folk. Let me show you around the kitchen and you can help me prepare the noon meal." For the next several hours, Mrs. Henderson patiently guided Grace around the kitchen, showing her where everything was kept, teaching her the layout of the counters and cabinets. Grace ran her hands over everything, memorizing positions and distances. The stove was here, the water pump there, the pantry 3 steps to the left. She stumbled a few times, misjudged distances, knocked over a cup, but Mrs. Henderson never scolded, just cleaned up the mess and showed her again. By the time the hands started coming in for the noon meal, Grace had helped prepare a large pot of beef stew and several pans of cornbread. She felt useful for the first time since arriving in Idaho, and that lifted her spirits considerably. The men were loud and boisterous as they filed into the kitchen, their boots heavy on the floor. Grace stayed back, not wanting to get in the way. "Boys, this is Miss Grace Ellsworth," Mrs. Henderson announced. "She will be helping me around the house from now on, so mind your manners." There was a chorus of greetings, and Grace nodded in their general direction. She heard Brennan's voice among them, greeting her politely. The men ate quickly, talking among themselves about the work they had been doing and what needed to be done in the afternoon. Grace listened, learning the rhythm of the ranch. They talked about cattle and fences and water supplies, about a rattlesnake someone had killed, about a horse that needed shoeing. It was all foreign to her, but fascinating in its way. After the meal, the men headed back out to work, and Grace helped Mrs. Henderson clean up. She washed dishes while Mrs. Henderson dried and put them away, guiding Grace's hands to the right spots. "You did well today," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "I think we will make a good team." "Thank you for your patience," Grace said. "I know it must be frustrating to have to explain everything." "Not at all, dear. You learn quickly and you are not afraid to try. That is what matters." Over the next few weeks, Grace settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned the layout of the house, then the immediate area around it, mapping everything in her mind. Mrs. Henderson taught her how to feed the chickens, how to gather eggs, how to hang laundry on the line. Grace insisted on pulling her own weight, and though she made mistakes, she kept trying until she got things right. Brennan was often around, fixing things on the house or working in the nearby barn. He was unfailingly kind to Grace, always warning her if she was about to walk into something, describing things she might find interesting, asking if she needed help without making her feel helpless. She found herself looking forward to his presence, to the sound of his voice and the way he treated her like a person rather than a problem. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Grace was sitting on the porch shelling peas when she heard Brennan's footsteps approaching. "Mind if I sit with you?" he asked. "Not at all." He settled onto the porch step with a sigh. "It has been a long day. We had to move a herd to a new pasture and one of the calves kept wandering off. Took us twice as long as it should have." Grace smiled. "That sounds frustrating." It was, but that is ranch life, always something going wrong. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You have settled in well. Mrs. Henderson says you are a natural." "I do not know about that, but I am trying. It feels good to be useful. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What is it like? Being blind, I mean. If that is too personal, you do not have to answer." Grace considered the question. Most people never asked, either because they were too polite or because they did not really want to know. "It is like living in a different world," she said slowly. "I remember what things look like from before, but those memories fade. Now I experience everything through sound and touch and smell. Sometimes it is frustrating because I cannot do things as quickly or easily as I used to. But sometimes I think I notice things that other people miss. The way someone's voice changes when they are tired or upset, the exact moment when bread is done baking just by the smell, the feel of the wind before a storm. That is interesting. I never thought about it that way. Most people do not. They just think of all the things I cannot do. But there are things I can do just differently. You are a remarkable woman, Grace." The way he said her name with such warmth and respect made her heart flutter. She told herself not to be foolish. Brennan was just being kind. He felt sorry for her, probably, or felt obligated to look after her because Sam had wanted to marry her. There was nothing more to it than that. But over the following weeks, she began to wonder if maybe there was more. Brennan sought her out more often, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings, talking about his day or asking about her life in Boston. He brought her wildflowers sometimes, describing their colors in detail so she could picture them in her mind. He asked her opinion on things, treating her thoughts as valuable. And sometimes, when he helped her over rough ground or guided her through an unfamiliar space, his touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Grace found herself falling for him, even though she tried to guard her heart. She had learned in Boston that men might be kind to a blind woman out of pity or duty, but they did not fall in love with her. She was damaged goods, a burden, not a real woman that a man might desire. But Brennan did not treat her like she was broken. He treated her like she was whole. One evening in late September, as the air began to cool and the leaves started to turn, Brennan found Grace sitting on the porch after dinner. The hands had all gone to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Henderson had left for town. Grace was alone, listening to the crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Grace," Brennan said softly, sitting down beside her. "Can we talk?" "Of course." Her heart began to race. There was something in his tone, something serious. "I have been thinking a lot lately," he began, and she heard him take a deep breath. "About you and about Sam and about this whole situation. You came here to marry Sam, to start a new life. That did not work out the way you planned, and you have been stuck here, working for room and board, not knowing what your future holds. That does not sit right with me." Grace felt her stomach sink. Was he going to tell her she needed to leave? That they had figured out what to do with the ranch and she was no longer needed? "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I am saying that I want to offer you what Sam would have offered you. A home, security, a place to belong. I do not understand. I am asking you to marry me, Grace." She sat frozen, her mind reeling. "You want to marry me?" "Yes. I know it is sudden, and I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I think we could make a good life together. You need stability, and I need." He trailed off, then continued, "I need someone like you, someone strong and brave and kind." "You feel sorry for me," Grace said, her voice sharp with hurt. "You are offering out of obligation." "No," Brennan said firmly. "That is not it at all. Grace, I have spent the last few weeks watching you adapt to a completely new life, learning everything from scratch, never complaining, never giving up. You help Mrs. Henderson all day without being asked. You are patient with the hands when they track mud through your clean kitchen. You sit out here in the evenings and you seem content, even though your whole life got turned upside down. How could I not admire that? How could I not want to be around you?" "Admiration is not love," Grace said, even as her heart ached. "Maybe not, but it is a start. Grace, I am not promising you some grand passion. I am not a smooth-talking man who knows how to say pretty things. But I am promising you honesty and respect and a genuine partnership. We could build something together. Something real." Grace sat in silence, her hands twisted in her lap. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this offer of security and companionship. But another part of her was afraid of being a burden, afraid of marrying a man who was only being noble, afraid of loving someone who would never truly love her back. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." He stood up and she heard him walk away, his boots heavy on the porch steps. She sat there alone, her mind spinning. That night she barely slept. She turned Brennan's proposal over and over in her mind, examining it from every angle. Was he being sincere, or was this just charity dressed up as marriage? Could she bear to marry another man she did not love, hoping that maybe someday affection would grow? Or was she already halfway in love with him, and that was what scared her most? The next morning, Mrs. Henderson sensed something was wrong. "You are quiet today, dear. Are you feeling well?" Grace hesitated, then decided to confide in the older woman. "Brennan asked me to marry him, Mrs." Henderson let out a delighted gasp. "Oh, that is wonderful. I was hoping he would work up the courage. That boy has been mooning over you for weeks." "What do you mean?" "Oh, honey, it is as plain as day to anyone with eyes. He is smitten with you. The way he looks at you, the way he finds excuses to be near you, the way his whole face lights up when you walk into a room. I have known Brennan for 5 years, and I have never seen him like this." Grace felt a flutter of hope. "Truly, you are not just saying that to make me feel better. I would not lie to you about something like this. That man is falling for you hard. Maybe he does not even realize it fully himself yet, but it is there. I see it every day." "But I am blind," Grace said, the words spilling out. "How could he really want me? How could he not just be settling out of kindness or obligation?" Mrs. Henderson made a dismissive sound. "Grace Ellsworth, you listen to me. Your eyes do not work, but there is nothing wrong with the rest of you. You are a beautiful, capable, intelligent woman. Any man would be lucky to have you. Brennan knows that. He is not settling. He is reaching for something he wants." "I am afraid," Grace whispered. "I am afraid of being hurt. I am afraid of being a burden. I am afraid of so many things." "That is natural, dear. Love is always a risk, but Brennan Boyd is a good man. One of the best I have ever known. If you have any feelings for him at all, I think you should take the chance. You might just find the happiness you deserve." Grace thought about Mrs. Henderson's words all day as she went about her chores. She thought about the way Brennan's voice made her feel safe, the way his laugh made her smile, the way his presence had become something she looked forward to, something that brightened her days. Was that love, or was it just gratitude and loneliness? That evening she found Brennan in the barn grooming one of the horses. She heard the brush strokes, rhythmic and soothing, and the soft sounds the horse made. "Brennan," she called from the doorway. The brushing stopped. "Grace, come in. Watch your step, there is loose hay on the floor." She moved forward carefully, following the sound of his voice. When she was close enough, she stopped and took a deep breath. "I have thought about your proposal," she said, and his voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the tension in it. "I need to know something first. Do you have feelings for me? Real feelings, not just responsibility or pity?" There was a long pause. Then she heard him set down the brush and move closer. He was standing right in front of her now. She could feel the warmth of his body, smell the scent of horse and hay and leather that clung to him. "Grace," he said, his voice low and rough. "From the moment I met you at the stage station, I have been drawn to you. At first, I thought it was just sympathy for your situation. But the more I got to know you, the more I realized it was something else. You are brave and strong, and you do not let anything stop you. You make me laugh. You make me think. When I am with you, I feel like the best version of myself. When I am not with you, I am thinking about when I will see you again. If that is not real feelings, I do not know what is." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "I have been trying not to because I was afraid you did not feel the same way. I thought you were just being kind." "I am not that kind," Brennan said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs, cradling her face in his hands. "Grace Ellsworth, I am falling in love with you too, so much that it scares me. Will you marry me? Not because you need security, and not because I feel obligated, but because I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know you and building a future with you." "Yes," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid strength of him, the reality of him. This was real. This was happening. She was going to marry Brennan Boyd, and he loved her. He truly loved her. He pulled back just enough to tilt her face up, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Grace had been kissed before, once by a boy when she was 15 before the fever. But this was different. This was a kiss that meant something, that spoke of love and commitment and forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brennan rested his forehead against hers. "I will be your eyes and your heart," he said softly. "I will describe the world to you, and I will love you with everything I have. That is my promise to you." "And I will be yours," Grace said. "All of me. That is my promise to you." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, as the sun set outside and the world turned golden and orange in ways that Grace could not see but could feel in the warmth on her skin and in the joy singing through her veins. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henderson was beside herself with excitement, helping Grace prepare for the wedding. There was no point in a fancy dress, Grace reasoned, since she would never see it and there was no one in Snake River to impress. But Mrs. Henderson insisted that every bride deserved to feel beautiful on her wedding day. "We will make you a dress of soft blue cotton," Mrs. Henderson declared. "It will bring out your complexion, and we will trim it with white lace." Grace agreed, touched by the older woman's enthusiasm. They spent hours measuring and cutting and stitching. Grace could sew, though slowly, and she helped as much as she could. Mrs. Henderson described every detail, painting pictures with her words. Brennan came by every evening, and they would sit on the porch and talk, holding hands, stealing kisses when Mrs. Henderson was not looking. He told her about his plans for the future, about how he had been saving money for years with the dream of buying his own piece of land someday. He described the ranch in detail, so Grace could picture it in her mind. The rolling hills covered in sage and grass, the mountains in the distance, the creek that ran through the property. "I want to show you everything," he said one evening. I know you cannot see it, but I can describe it, and you can feel it and experience it in your own way." "I would like that," Grace said. "I want to know your world." "It is our world now," Brennan corrected gently. "Everything I have is yours too." Grace learned more about Brennan's past. He had been born in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had been a rancher, and Brennan had grown up working with cattle and horses. When he was 19, he had headed north, looking for adventure and opportunity. He had worked on ranches all over the West before settling in Snake River 5 years ago, working for Sam Winters. "Sam was a good boss and a good friend," Brennan said. "He taught me a lot about running a ranch. When he died, I thought about moving on, finding work somewhere else. But then you arrived and everything changed. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere but here." Grace told him more about her own life, about her childhood in Boston, her parents who had been loving but poor, her father working as a clerk, her mother taking in sewing. About the fever that had nearly killed her, that had taken her sight and left her weak for months. About the school for the blind that had taught her she could still have a life, still be independent. About the slow realization that the world saw her as less than whole, that opportunities would be limited, that she would always be pitied rather than respected. "That is why I answered Sam's advertisement," she said. "I wanted to go somewhere where no one knew me, where I could start fresh. I thought maybe in the West, people would judge me less harshly." "You do not need to start fresh with me," Brennan said. "I know you, Grace, the real you, and I love what I see." "But you cannot see me," Grace said with a small smile. "Not the way you mean." "Sure I can," Brennan said. "I see your kindness when you help Mrs. Henderson, even when you are tired. I see your courage when you tackle something new without fear. I see your intelligence when you solve problems in ways I never would have thought of. I see your beauty when you laugh or when the sun catches your hair. I see all of you, Grace, and it is more than enough." Grace felt her heart overflow with love for this man. He had taken what could have been a disaster and turned it into a blessing. He had seen her when she thought she was invisible. They were married on a crisp October morning, with the minister from the church in Snake River officiating. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with Mrs. Henderson and the ranch hands as witnesses. Grace wore her blue dress, and Mrs. Henderson had woven wildflowers into her hair. Brennan described it all to her in detail before the ceremony, painting a picture so vivid she could almost see it. When the minister asked Brennan if he took Grace to be his wife, his voice rang out strong and clear. "I do, with all my heart." And when Grace said her own vows, her voice did not waver. "I do, for now and always." They sealed their marriage with a kiss, and the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears. The hands clapped Brennan on the back and congratulated Grace shyly. There was a small celebration afterward with a meal that Mrs. Henderson had been preparing for days. There was roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, apple pie and coffee. The hands were on their best behavior, telling stories and joking, making Grace laugh until her sides hurt. As the sun began to set, the guests began to drift away. Mrs. Henderson gave Grace a long hug and whispered, "Be happy, dear. You deserve it." And then Grace and Brennan were alone in the house that was now their home. Brennan took her hand and led her to the bedroom, moving slowly, giving her time to adjust to this new reality. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," Grace admitted. "I have never been with a man before." "Neither have I," Brennan said. "Been with a woman, I mean. So we will figure this out together." He was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable. He described what he was doing, asked permission before each new touch. Grace felt self-conscious at first, aware of her vulnerability, but Brennan's tenderness put her at ease. He told her she was beautiful, kissed her with reverence, held her like she was precious. Afterward, lying in his arms, Grace felt a contentment she had never known. This was what home felt like. This was what love felt like. She had crossed half a continent to find a man she would never meet, and instead she had found the man she was meant to be with all along. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Brennan whispered back. "I will love you until the day I die, and beyond if I can manage it." Grace smiled and snuggled closer to him, and for the first time in years she felt truly, completely safe. The seasons changed, and Grace and Brennan settled into married life. Grace learned more about managing the ranch house, taking on more responsibilities. She learned to bake bread from scratch, to churn butter, to preserve vegetables for the winter. She learned to recognize each of the ranch hands by their footsteps and voices, learned their likes and dislikes, learned to tease them and make them laugh. Brennan was true to his word about being her eyes. He described everything to her in vivid detail. The way the mountains looked when they were covered in snow, the color of the sunset, purple and orange and pink bleeding across the sky, the face of a new foal, all gangly legs and soft eyes. He never made her feel like she was missing out. Instead, he made her feel like she was experiencing things in a richer, deeper way, because he was sharing his vision with her. In November, they received word that Sam Winters's brother had decided to sell the ranch rather than move from California to run it himself. Brennan was worried about what that would mean for their future, whether the new owner would keep him on or bring in his own men. "We will figure it out," Grace said firmly. "If we need to move, we will move. If we need to find new work, we will find it. We will be fine as long as we are together." But as it turned out, they did not need to worry. The brother offered to sell the ranch to Brennan at a fair price, with generous terms. Brennan had saved money over the years, and with what he had, plus a loan from the bank in town, he could afford to buy the ranch outright. "It will be a lot of work," Brennan said, excitement and nervousness mingling in his voice. "And there will be years where we barely scrape by. Ranching is risky. But it will be ours, Grace, our land, our home, our future." "Then we should do it," Grace said without hesitation. "I believe in you. I believe in us." So Brennan bought the ranch, and suddenly they were landowners, responsible for 1,000 acres and a small herd of cattle and 6 employees. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Brennan threw himself into the work with a passion. He was up before dawn every day, working until after dark, mending fences and tending cattle and doing the 1,000 tasks that came with running a ranch. Grace worried that he was pushing himself too hard, but he seemed energized by the challenge. "I am working for us now," he told her. "For our future. That makes all the difference." Grace did her part too, managing the household with Mrs. Henderson's help, feeding the hands, keeping the books. She had learned arithmetic at the school for the blind, and though she could not see numbers written down, she could do calculations in her head and keep track of expenses and income. She became Brennan's partner in every sense, helping him make decisions, offering advice, supporting him through the difficult times. Winter came, harsh and cold. The snow piled up, and the cattle needed constant care to make sure they had enough to eat and did not freeze. Grace rarely saw Brennan during those months. He would come in late, eat quickly, and fall into bed exhausted. She kept the house warm and the food ready, and she did not complain, because she understood that this was the reality of ranch life. But she missed him. She missed their evening talks on the porch, their stolen moments of intimacy, the sound of his laughter. She felt lonely in a way she had not felt since coming to Snake River. One particularly cold night in January, Brennan came in later than usual, half frozen and exhausted. Grace heard him stumble in the door and rushed to help him. His clothes were stiff with ice, and his hands were so cold he could barely move them. "Brennan, you are freezing," she said, alarmed. "Come sit by the stove. Let me help you get these wet clothes off." She helped him peel off his coat and gloves, then wrapped a blanket around him and made him sit close to the stove. She heated water for coffee and made him drink it, holding the cup to his lips when his hands shook too much to hold it himself. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I lost track of time. I was checking the herd and one of the cows was in trouble. I had to help her deliver her calf. By the time I was done, it was dark and the storm had gotten worse." "Is the calf all right?" Grace asked. "Yes, it is a little bull, healthy and strong." Brennan leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes. "I am so tired, Grace. I feel like I have not slept in weeks." "I know," Grace said gently. She knelt in front of him and took his hands in hers, rubbing them to restore circulation. "You are doing too much. You need to rest." "I cannot. There is too much to do." "The work will still be there tomorrow. Right now you need to take care of yourself." She stood and tugged on his hand. "Come to bed. You can sleep late tomorrow. I will make sure the hands know what needs to be done." Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He let Grace lead him to their bedroom, help him out of the rest of his clothes, and tuck him into bed. She climbed in beside him and held him, feeling the tension slowly drain out of his body as warmth and exhaustion overtook him. "Thank you," he mumbled, already half asleep. "I do not know what I would do without you." "You will never have to find out," Grace whispered, kissing his forehead. "I am not going anywhere." Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing with it new life and new hope. The cattle that had survived the winter were healthy, and there were several new calves. The ranch hands worked to repair the damage the winter had caused, fixing fences and buildings and equipment. Grace felt the change in Brennan as the days grew longer and warmer. He was still working hard, but the desperate edge was gone. He came home earlier, smiled more, took time to sit with her on the porch in the evenings like they used to. One evening in late April, as they sat together watching the sun set, or rather, as Brennan watched and described it to Grace, he said, "I could not have made it through this winter without you. You know that, right?" "You would have managed," Grace said. "Maybe. But it would have been a lot harder and a lot lonelier. Having you here, knowing you were waiting for me, knowing I had someone to come home to, that made all the difference. You are my partner, Grace, in every way." "And you are mine," Grace said. She hesitated, then added, "Brennan, there is something I need to tell you." "What is it?" He sounded concerned. "I think I am with child." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Brennan let out a whoop of joy and grabbed her, lifting her off the porch step and spinning her around. "Are you sure? How long have you known?" "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Grace laughed, dizzy from the spinning. "I only just became sure. I did not want to say anything until I was certain, but I am. Mrs. Henderson confirmed it yesterday." Brennan set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "This is the best news I have ever gotten. We are going to have a baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, suddenly nervous. They had not talked much about children, though she had assumed they both wanted them eventually. "Happy." "Grace, I am over the moon. I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." He pulled her close and held her for a long time, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. Grace felt a wave of love so strong it almost hurt. This was her family. This man and this baby growing inside her. This was everything she had never dared to hope for. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt tired and queasy for the first few months, but Mrs. Henderson helped her through it, offering advice and remedies. Brennan hovered constantly, worried that she was doing too much, but Grace insisted on continuing her normal routine as long as she could. "I am pregnant, not an invalid." she told him more than once. "I can still cook and clean and do my regular work." But as she grew bigger, moving became more difficult. She had to adjust to her changing body, to the shift in her center of gravity that made her clumsiness more pronounced. She bumped into things more often, misjudged distances, stumbled over her own feet. It was frustrating and sometimes frightening, but Brennan was always there to catch her, to steady her, to remind her that it was temporary. In the evenings, Brennan would sit with her and talk to the baby, describing the world it would soon be born into. He told stories about his own childhood, about the ranch, about Grace. He placed his hand on her stomach and marveled at every kick and movement. "Can you feel that?" Grace would ask, laughing as the baby kicked particularly hard. "I feel it. Our baby is strong, just like its mother." Grace hoped the baby would be healthy. She worried sometimes that her blindness might be passed on, that her child would have to struggle the way she had. But Brennan assured her that even if the baby was blind, they would love it and help it thrive, just as Grace herself had learned to thrive. In early December, as the winter cold began to set in again, Grace's labor started. It was a long, difficult process. Mrs. Henderson stayed by her side, coaching her through the contractions while Brennan paced outside the bedroom, too nervous to sit still. Finally, after nearly 12 hours, Grace felt the baby slide free with one final push. There was a moment of terrible silence, and then the baby let out a strong, healthy cry. Grace sobbed with relief. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Grace's arms. Grace held her son for the first time, running her hands gently over his tiny body, feeling the softness of his skin, the delicacy of his fingers and toes. She touched his face, memorizing every feature through her fingertips. He was perfect. Brennan came into the room, his footsteps hesitant. "Can I see him?" "Of course," Grace said. "Come meet your son." Brennan sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in Grace's arms. She heard his breath catch. "He is so small," Brennan whispered, "and so perfect. He has your nose, Grace, and a lot of dark hair." "Does he have your eyes?" Grace asked. Brennan was quiet for a moment. "I think so. They are blue right now, but Mrs. Henderson says they might change." Grace smiled. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the months, but had not decided on anything definite. Now, holding their son, Brennan said, "What about Benjamin? It means son of my right hand, someone strong and reliable. Benjamin Boyd." "Benjamin," Grace repeated, tasting the name. "Ben, I like it. Benjamin Boyd it is." They sat together, the three of them, a family. Grace felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. A year and a half ago, she had been alone in Boston, desperate and frightened. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home and a son. She had everything. Benjamin was a healthy, happy baby. He cried lustily when he was hungry, slept soundly when he was fed, and gazed up at his parents with wide, curious eyes. Grace learned to care for him despite her blindness, relying on touch and sound and instinct. She learned the different meanings of his cries, learned to change his diaper in the dark, learned to feed him and soothe him and keep him safe. Brennan was a devoted father. He would sit for hours holding Ben, talking to him, describing the world outside. He took him out to the barn to see the horses, carried him around the ranch, showed him everything. "He is too young to understand," Grace said, amused. "Maybe, but I want him to know his world from the beginning," Brennan said. "And I want to share it with him, the way I share it with you." As Ben grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Brennan was a good manager, fair with his workers and smart about his decisions. The herd grew and they were able to hire another hand. Money was still tight, but they were making a profit, slowly building something sustainable. Grace continued to help with the household and the bookkeeping, even with a young child to care for. It was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling. She had found her place in the world, her purpose. She was a wife, a mother, a partner. She was valued and loved. Ben was 2 years old when Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with excitement but also some trepidation. They knew how much work one child was. 2 would be even more challenging. "We will manage," Brennan said confidently. "We always do." The second pregnancy was harder than the first. Grace was older now, 26, and chasing after a rambunctious toddler while pregnant was exhausting. But Mrs. Henderson helped as much as she could, and Brennan took on more of the childcare duties in the evenings. In the summer of 1885, Grace gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter this time, only 6 hours, and the baby came into the world screaming with indignation. Mrs. Henderson laughed as she cleaned the baby off. "This one has spirit," she said. "She is going to keep you on your toes." "What does she look like?" Grace asked, holding her daughter for the first time. "She has your coloring," Brennan said softly. "Light hair and fair skin. And she is beautiful, Grace, just like her mother." They named her Beatrice after Brennan's mother. Beatrice Boyd was a tiny, fierce thing from the start. She nursed eagerly, cried loudly when she was displeased, and seemed determined to keep her parents awake at night. Ben was fascinated by his new sister. He wanted to hold her constantly, though he had to be supervised carefully because he was still so young. Grace listened to her son talk to his sister, telling her about the ranch and the animals, and her heart swelled with love. Life with 2 young children was chaotic. Grace felt like she was constantly nursing or changing diapers or soothing someone who was crying. But there were moments of pure joy too. Ben's laughter as Brennan chased him around the yard. Beatrice's tiny hand wrapped around Grace's finger. The feeling of her family all together, safe and happy. The years passed quickly. Ben grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. Beatrice grew into a bright, headstrong girl who tested every boundary and asked endless questions. Grace taught them both as much as she could, reading to them by memory, telling them stories, teaching them their letters and numbers. When Ben was 6 and Beatrice was 4, they began asking questions about why their mother could not see. "Mother, why do you always close your eyes?" Ben asked one day. Grace had been expecting this question for years, but it still caught her off guard. "I am not closing my eyes, sweetheart. My eyes are open, but they do not work the way yours do. I cannot see." "Why not?" "I was sick when I was younger, and the sickness hurt my eyes. So now I use my other senses to understand the world. I listen to sounds and touch things and smell things. I just do it differently than you do." "Does it hurt?" Beatrice asked, her voice small. "No, honey, it does not hurt. It is just the way I am." "I think you are special," Ben said loyally. "You can do things other mothers cannot do. You always know when I am sad even when I do not say anything. And you make the best bread even though you cannot see what you are doing." Grace pulled both children into a hug, her eyes stinging with tears. "Thank you, my loves. You are both very special to me too." Brennan supported her in teaching the children about her blindness, answering their questions honestly, and never making it seem like something shameful or strange. He taught them to help their mother when she needed it, but also to respect her independence. The children learned to announce themselves when they entered a room so Grace would know they were there. They learned to put things back where they belonged so Grace could find them. They learned that their mother was different but not less. When Ben was 8, he started helping more on the ranch, learning to ride and rope and handle cattle. Brennan was patient with him, teaching him the same way Sam Winters had taught Brennan years before. Grace listened to them together, heard the pride in Brennan's voice as he described what Ben was doing, and she felt grateful that her son had such a good father to guide him. Beatrice showed less interest in the ranch work, preferring to stay close to Grace and help with the household tasks. She learned to cook and clean, and she had a talent for sewing that Grace had never possessed. She would sit beside Grace and describe the stitches she was making, the patterns she was creating, and Grace would marvel at her daughter's skill. In the evenings, the family would gather on the porch, just as Grace and Brennan had done in the early days of their marriage. Brennan would describe the sunset to all of them, painting pictures with his words. The children would talk about their day, sharing their triumphs and frustrations. Grace would listen, her heart full, amazed at the life she had built. One evening when Ben was 10 and Beatrice was 8, Ben asked, "Father, how did you and Mother meet?" Brennan glanced at Grace and she nodded, giving him permission to tell the story. "Your mother came to Snake River to marry a man named Sam Winters," Brennan began. "I worked for Sam at the time, but Sam died before your mother arrived, and she was left alone in a strange place with no one to help her. I could not just leave her there, so I brought her to the ranch. Mrs. Henderson took her in, and your mother started helping with the household work. And you fell in love," Beatrice said dreamily. She had already developed a romantic streak. "We did," Brennan said. "Your mother was brave and kind and beautiful. I admired her strength. She never complained about her situation, never gave up, never felt sorry for herself. And the more I got to know her, the more I realized I could not imagine my life without her. So I asked her to marry me, and thankfully she said yes." "That is a good story," Ben said. "It sounds like something from one of Mother's books." "It is a very good story," Grace agreed, reaching over to take Brennan's hand. "And the best part is that it is true." "Do you miss being able to see Mother?" Beatrice asked suddenly. Grace considered the question. It was something she thought about sometimes, late at night when she could not sleep. Did she miss seeing the faces of her children, the man she loved? Did she miss sunsets and flowers and the color blue? "Sometimes," she said honestly. "There are things I wish I could see, your faces most of all. The ranch, the mountains, all the things your father describes to me. But I have learned to see in different ways. I see you through my hands, through your voices, through the sound of your footsteps. I see your father in the way he cares for me, the way he makes me laugh. I see the ranch in the smells and sounds and the feel of the wind. It is different than the way you see, but it is still seeing in its own way." "I think that is beautiful," Beatrice said softly. "So do I," Brennan said, squeezing Grace's hand. As the children grew older, the ranch continued to thrive. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with cattle rustlers and predators and illness, but they had survived and even prospered. Brennan had a reputation in the area as a fair and honest man, and people respected him. Grace was known for her kindness and her skill in managing the household, and she had become friends with several women in town. They had become part of the community in a way Grace had never been in Boston. Here, people knew her as Grace Boyd, wife and mother and rancher, not as that poor blind woman. They valued her for who she was, not in spite of her blindness. It was everything she had hoped for when she had left Boston all those years ago. When Ben was 16, he started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner. Her name was Sarah, and she was sweet and sensible and clearly adored Ben. Grace liked her immediately. "He is so young," Grace said to Brennan one night after Ben had gone to bed. "I know we were young when we married, but still, he is only 16. "He is not getting married tomorrow," Brennan said reasonably. "He is just courting. They will probably court for a few years before they even think about marriage. That is how it should be." "I suppose you are right." It is just strange to think of him as old enough to be interested in girls. He was just a baby a moment ago." "That is how it feels," Brennan agreed. "But he is growing up and we have to let him. We raised him well, Grace. He is a good young man. He will make good choices." And Ben did make good choices. He continued to work hard on the ranch, saved his money, treated Sarah with respect and affection. When he was 18, he asked Sarah to marry him, and she accepted. They were married in the spring of 1895 with the whole town in attendance. Grace cried at the wedding, overwhelmed with emotion. Her son was a man now, starting his own life. It was what she wanted for him, but it was also bittersweet. "He will always be your son," Brennan whispered to her during the ceremony. "This is not goodbye, it is just the next chapter." Ben and Sarah built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, and Ben continued to work with his father. Sarah fit into the family easily, helping Grace with the household work and getting along well with Beatrice. Within a year, Sarah announced she was expecting and Grace was going to be a grandmother. The baby, a boy they named Samuel after the man who had inadvertently brought Grace and Brennan together, was born healthy and strong. Grace held her grandson for the first time and marveled at the miracle of it. She had gone from being alone in the world to having a husband, 2 children, a daughter-in-law, and now a grandchild. Her family had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. Beatrice, now 17, had no interest in settling down yet. She wanted to see more of the world, to have adventures. Grace worried about her restless daughter, but Brennan was more philosophical. "She will find her way," he said. "She is like you, Grace, strong and independent. She needs to spread her wings before she is ready to settle." Beatrice eventually decided she wanted to become a teacher. She went to the normal school in Boys for 2 years, then came back to Snake River and started teaching at the small schoolhouse. She was good at it, patient and creative and passionate about learning. Grace was proud of her daughter's accomplishments. The years continued to pass. More grandchildren came, from Ben and Sarah, and eventually from Beatrice, who married a schoolteacher from a neighboring town when she was 24. The ranch remained successful, and Brennan gradually began turning over more of the daily operations to Ben, though he still supervised and made the major decisions. Grace settled into the role of matriarch, grandmother and advisor and keeper of family stories. She taught her grandchildren the same things she had taught her children, and she delighted in their company. They did not see her blindness as strange. To them, it was just how Grandma was. She was the one who told the best stories, who always had cookies, who gave the best hugs. On a warm summer evening in 1910, Grace and Brennan sat on their porch, just as they had done for nearly 30 years. They were both in their 50s now, their hair gray and their bodies not quite as strong as they once were, but they were healthy and content. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked suddenly. "Regret what? Marrying me? Taking on a blind wife? You could have had someone without complications, someone who could have helped more on the ranch." Brennan turned to her, and even though she could not see him, she felt the intensity of his gaze. "Grace Boyd, I have never regretted marrying you for even a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You have been my partner in every way. How could I possibly regret that? I just wonder sometimes if I have held you back. You have never held me back. If anything, you have pushed me forward. You made me want to be a better man. You challenged me to see the world differently. Grace, you are not a burden. You are a blessing. You always have been." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. Even after all these years, Brennan's words could still move her deeply. "I love you," she said, "more than I can ever express." "I love you too," Brennan said. "I told you on the day I proposed that I would be your eyes and your heart. That is still true." It will always be true." He pulled her close, and they sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the life they had built. Their children were grown and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving. The ranch was prosperous. They had weathered every storm together and come out stronger on the other side. Grace thought back to that day in 1882, when she had stepped off the stagecoach in Snake River, frightened and alone, with no idea what her future held. She had been blind then in more ways than one. Blind to the possibilities that lay ahead, blind to the love that was waiting for her, blind to the strength she possessed. But Brennan had helped her see, not with her eyes, which would never work again, but with her heart. He had shown her that she was capable of more than she had ever dreamed. He had given her a life full of purpose and meaning and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Brennan asked softly. "About how blessed I am," Grace said. "About how grateful I am that I took that stagecoach to Idaho all those years ago. About how that terrible, frightening day turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." "Same here," Brennan said. "The day you arrived was the day my real life began." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the stars came out overhead. Grace could not see them, but Brennan described them to her as he always did, painting pictures of the night sky with his words. "There is Orion, the hunter," he said. "You can see his belt, 3 stars in a row, and over there is the Big Dipper. It looks like a ladle with a long handle." Grace listened, seeing the stars in her mind's eye, and smiled. This was her life. This was her love. This was everything she had ever wanted, wrapped up in one perfect moment. "Tell me again what the moon looks like tonight," she said. "It is nearly full," Brennan said. "Round and bright, hanging low in the eastern sky. It is so bright it casts shadows on the ground. The light is silver white, cold and beautiful." "I can feel it," Grace said. "I can feel the moonlight on my face." "That is because you see with more than your eyes," Brennan said. "You see with your whole self. That is one of the things I love most about you." They stayed on the porch long into the night, talking and laughing and simply being together. Inside the house, the lamps were lit, casting a warm glow through the windows. Down the road, they could see the lights from Ben and Sarah's house. In the distance, the mountains rose dark against the starlit sky. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, deepest form. Grace had been blind when she arrived in Snake River, uncertain and afraid. But Brennan had been her eyes, showing her the world in vivid detail, helping her navigate not just the physical landscape but the landscape of the heart. And in return, she had given him her whole self, trusting him completely, loving him unreservedly. Together, they had built something beautiful. A life, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on, working the land, loving each other, building their own futures. And it had all started with a blind woman stepping off a stagecoach and a cowboy who had seen her not as broken or helpless, but as whole and worthy of love. "I would not change a single thing," Grace said softly. "Neither would I," Brennan replied. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had overcome every obstacle, who had loved each other through every season of life. They had started as strangers brought together by circumstance and had become partners bound together by choice. Grace had come to Idaho looking for security and had found so much more. She had found love, real and lasting and true. She had found a man who saw past her blindness to the woman beneath, who valued her for who she was, who had indeed become both her eyes and her heart. And Brennan had found a woman who challenged him, completed him, made him better than he had ever thought he could be. Together, they had created a life that was richer and fuller than either could have managed alone. As the night grew late and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, arm in arm, comfortable in each other's presence after decades of marriage. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long practice, and when they finally lay down together, Grace rested her head on Brennan's shoulder, just as she had done on their wedding night so many years before. "Good night, my love," Brennan whispered, kissing her forehead. "Good night," Grace whispered back. "Thank you for being my eyes and my heart." "Always," Brennan promised, "for as long as I live and beyond." They drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed. Their story, which had begun with uncertainty and loss, had become a testament to the power of love to transform, to heal, to make whole. In the morning, they would wake to a new day on the ranch they had built together. There would be work to do, grandchildren to spoil, life to live. But for now, they simply rested, content in the love they had found and nurtured over the course of nearly 3 decades. Grace had once thought that her blindness defined her, limited her, made her less than whole. But Brennan had taught her that she was so much more than her disability. She was strong and capable and worthy of love. She was a wife and mother and grandmother. She was a partner and friend and confidant. She was complete, not in spite of her blindness, but as a whole person who happened to be blind. That was the gift Brennan had given her, the understanding that she was enough exactly as she was. And the gift she had given him was equally valuable. The understanding that love was not about physical perfection or conventional expectations, but about seeing and valuing the person beneath the surface, about partnership and respect and unwavering commitment. Together, they had proven that love could conquer any obstacle, that two people who were willing to work together and support each other could build something lasting and beautiful, regardless of the challenges they faced. As the moon continued its journey across the Idaho sky and the stars wheeled overhead, Grace and Brennan slept peacefully, their lives intertwined, their hearts beating in harmony, their love as strong and sure as the land beneath them. They had found each other in the vast expanse of the American West, two souls who had been searching for something they could not name. And in finding each other, they had found home, purpose, and a love that would endure through all the years to come. The blind bride and the cowboy who had promised to be her eyes had created a life together that was richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to dream. And that life, built on love and trust and mutual respect, was the truest happily ever after either of them could have asked for. Their story was complete, their love proven, their legacy assured. And as they slept in the house they had made a home, surrounded by the family they had created, on the land they had tamed together, they embodied everything that was good and true about love in its purest form. Grace had traveled 2,000 miles to find a husband, and had instead found a partner, a soulmate, a man who saw her clearly despite her blindness and loved her completely because of who she was. Brennan had been working a ranch in the middle of Idaho and had found the missing piece of his own soul, a woman who challenged him and completed him and made him want to be the best version of himself. Together, they had written a love story that would be told and retold through the generations, a story of courage and faith and the transformative power of seeing with the heart rather than the eyes. And though Grace could not see the world with her physical sight, she had learned to see it in ways that were deeper and more meaningful, ways that most people never experienced. She had learned to see love in the touch of a hand, to see beauty in the sound of laughter, to see joy in the feel of the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She had learned to see her children in the sound of their voices and the warmth of their hugs, to see her husband in the steady beat of his heart and the strength of his arms around her. And Brennan had learned to see the world through her eyes, to appreciate the things he had always taken for granted, to slow down and notice the details that made life rich and meaningful. He had learned that love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about showing up every day and choosing to see the best in each other, to support each other through the hard times, to celebrate each other in the good times. Their love story, born out of loss and uncertainty, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of love to overcome any obstacle, and to the truth that home is not a place but a person. That family is not defined by blood alone, but by the bonds we choose to create. Grace and Brennan had chosen each other, and in making that choice, they had chosen a life of purpose and meaning and deep, abiding joy. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, togetherness over loneliness. And in making those choices every single day for 3 decades, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on their legacy, working the ranch, loving their own families, passing down the stories and values that Grace and Brennan had instilled in them. The Boyd family would continue to thrive in Snake River, Idaho, for generations to come. And at the heart of that family would always be the story of the blind bride and the cowboy who had seen her truly and loved her completely. As dawn broke over the mountains and the first light of a new day crept through the windows of the ranch house, Grace stirred in her sleep and unconsciously moved closer to Brennan, seeking his warmth and solidity even in her dreams. And Brennan, still sleeping, automatically tightened his arms around her, protecting her, cherishing her, loving her with every beat of his heart. This was their life. This was their love. This was their happily ever after, earned through hard work and dedication, and an unwavering commitment to each other. And it was more beautiful, more fulfilling, more meaningful than either of them could have imagined on that hot August day in 1882, when a blind woman had stepped off a stagecoach and a cowboy had stepped forward to help her. They had found each other in the wilderness of the American West, and together they had created an oasis of love and family and home. Their story was complete, their love was eternal, and their legacy would live on forever in the hearts of those they loved and who loved them in return. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.